Do you believe that we, the Althar, lost to a civilization that barely knew the stars? General Tarkis, a war veteran, stared at the reporter with a heavy gaze. Do you want to know how they won? He asked. It wasn't by strength or luck. It was something much worse. Was it a failure in strategy? Numerical superiority? The inexperienced reporter adjusted his visor, waiting for an explanation. We had everything, unbeatable weapons, indestructible fleets, and yet we were crushed. Why? Because they think differently. They fight differently. Do you understand destruction? Tarkis asked, glaring at the reporter. While we were perfecting flawless missiles and impeccable strategies, humans were turning war into entertainment. They don't play by the rules. To them, chaos is a weapon. He paused, his claws drumming on the table. In the first battle, our forces formed perfect lines, coordinated by our finest algorithms. And them? They blew up their own freighters, turning debris into projectiles. Metal fragments pierced through our ships like paper. Tarkis leaned closer, his voice dripping with irony. You think that's primitive? It's creativity. And do you know what's terrifying? To them, war isn't just survival. It's entertainment. It's a game. And in that game, they're unbeatable. Tarkis continued, his eyes glowing with a mix of indignation and admiration. I remember the first time we saw a human squadron. It was nothing like our disciplined formations. They were disorganized, improvised, and yet, it worked. They relied on something they call instinct, something our algorithms could never predict. That, reporter, was the beginning of our end. Incredible, murmured the reporter, quickly jotting down every word. But how did they maintain discipline amidst such chaos? Discipline? Tarkis let out a bitter laugh. They call it leadership. Humans follow those who inspire, not those who calculate. And their greatest trick? Any one of them can be a leader when the moment demands it. It doesn't matter if it's a low-ranking soldier or a seasoned commander. They adapt their strategies so that every individual becomes an essential part of the chaos. The reporter paused, pondering. And what about their technology? Surely that limited them. You don't understand, do you? Tarkis replied, shaking his head. They use technology as an extension of their imagination. Their ships were brutal, almost grotesque, but they endured. Their weapons? A combination of everything. If something could cause destruction, they turned it into a weapon without hesitation. The general's jaw tightened for a moment before he delivered the final words of his account. In the end, it wasn't what they had that defeated us. It was how they thought. Against that, no technology can prevail. But what about you? Have you ever considered how an idea can be more powerful than any weapon? If this story has made you reflect, share it with other curious minds and leave your opinion in the comments. Let's keep exploring what makes us so unpredictable. The reporter, his antenna trembling with growing unease, hesitantly asked, but, General, what about our numbers? We always outnumbered the humans. Shouldn't that have guaranteed our advantage? Tarkis sighed deeply, leaning forward as if carrying the weight of an entire world. Ah, numbers. Of course, we believed our numerical superiority would be decisive. The problem, reporter, is that humans have a peculiar talent. They thrive when they are at a disadvantage. How is that possible? The reporter asked, incredulity dripping from his words. History, Tarkis replied with a tone of resignation. They grew up on a world that always conspired against them. Storms, predators, diseases. Their survival was never about balance, but about overcoming. And what we learned too late is that they turned those stories into something greater. They fight as if they are heroes of their own myths. The general paused, letting the silence amplify the weight of his words. Thermopylae, Midway, even their fictional legendary battles, like something called Helm's Deep. To them, being outnumbered isn't a weakness. It's an incentive. And what happened in the final battles, the reporter insisted. Tarkis clenched his claws against the table, his voice cold with bitterness. They used our confidence against us. Risky strategies, unpredictable actions, calculated sacrifices. No matter what we tried, humans always found a way. And that's what makes them invincible. They don't fight to survive, they fight to win. The atmosphere grew heavy, as if Tarkis's words had drained the air from the room. He leaned back, his eyes lost in a void that seemed vaster than space. There's something I haven't told you. Something we never understood, and that haunts me to this day. The reporter leaned in, his antenna vibrating with anxiety. What was it, General? Tarkis hesitated, his expression hardening. In the last battle, when we thought we had finally cornered them, they did something impossible. It wasn't just a creative move or a calculated sacrifice. It was something that defied logic. He stopped, struggling with the words. The humans abandoned their main ships. They literally emptied them. Every crew member, every soldier. Only empty hulls remained, floating in space. We thought they had given up. That they had finally surrendered. Tarkis pressed his claws against the table. But then, they exploded. Exploded, the reporter echoed, confused. But why? They wouldn't have survived. It wasn't to survive, Tarkis replied, his voice low. It was to create the largest debris field ever seen. A floating graveyard that nullified our sensors, blocked our movements, blinded us. In the midst of it, they returned. Not in ships, but in rescue pods and individual suits. Each human fighting alone, without central command, like a swarm of uncontrollable predators. It was total chaos. The general looked at the reporter, his voice now a whisper filled with gravity. We didn't lose because they were better. We lost because we couldn't understand what drove them. They fought as if they had already lost everything, and as if that was liberating. Tarkis stood up, a glimmer of something between fear and respect in his eyes. And to this day, I wonder, was that what they wanted all along? To make us the hunted? Tarkis remained silent for a long moment, as if words were useless against the weight of his memories. When he finally spoke, his voice was a whisper, heavy as lead. In the end, we realized too late. We weren't fighting an enemy. We were fighting an idea. Something that cannot be destroyed. The reporter leaned in further, almost begging for answers. What do you mean, General? What idea was that? Tarkis raised his eyes, and for the first time, there was no hatred or pride. Only a bitter surrender. The idea that losing doesn't matter. To them, every defeat was a lesson. Every casualty was a necessary sacrifice. And every retreat was just a step toward a new attack. While we calculated risks, they lived as if they had nothing left to lose. He clenched his claws against the table, leaving marks in the metal. After they destroyed our fleets, I thought it was over. But then, the transmissions came. Hundreds of them. Thousands. From every corner of the galaxy. Human voices, speaking in unison. It wasn't about victory. It was about freedom. About ensuring that no one, ever again, would dominate space as we tried to. The reporter froze, his antenna trembling with the weight of the words. And what happened next? Tarkis rose slowly, a distant look on his face. Next. They disappeared. Abandoned the battlefields, their bases, even their planets. As if they had never existed. But they didn't leave us in peace. No, they left us with something much worse. The reporter blinked, confused. Worse than defeat? Tarkis nodded, his voice low and grim. They left us with fear. Fear that one day they'll return. Because now we know that, to them, the war was never about us. It was about teaching everyone that no one, not even the Althar, is safe from their vengeance. And if they return, it won't be to fight. It will be to finish what they started. The room fell into an oppressive silence. The reporter turned off his recorder, but couldn't bring himself to move. In that moment, he realized, the war wasn't over. It was just beginning. So, what do you think? Is humanity truly prepared for something like this? Or is it us who should fear them? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to explore more stories that challenge logic and imagination. After all, the war may just be beginning.